Okay, we're going to tackle something a little bit big this week. We're going to talk about what makes a good photo, what actually goes into, and what is the difference, I guess, between a good photo and a kind of mediocre average photo, and then even maybe a bad photo, and why sometimes do some things matter and some other things don't. There's a lot to go over. We're going to get into it because, of course, it's Tutorial Tuesday. Welcome back to Tutorial Tuesday, where each week for a Tuesday, we bring you a brand new fresh photography tutorial. I'm feeling a bit Christmassy. We've got the Christmas tree up. We're getting some good times going. We're kind of in a nice environment here, a little bit different angle. I'm having a good time. We're going to talk about what makes a good photo. And this is something that obviously as photographers, we all strive to not only understand, but also just be better at, be able to kind of understand and use to our advantage when we go to take photos, no matter the genre, right? This is a genre spanning kind of question. How do we take better photos and what actually goes into making a good photo? Well, there's loads of stuff. There's some stuff that I think is more important than others. I'm going to give you my opinion on it. I should probably mention, I guess you know this already, this is all subjective. This is all really just opinion based because ultimately at the end of the day, it's art, right? And that means that there is no correct answer. Whatever you think is good, well then that's good. Let me know down in the comments though while we're going, what you agree with, what you disagree with, and what you think is probably one of the most important things that makes a good photo a good photo. So let's get into it. Now, there's a lot of things that I think go into making a good photo, but at the end, I'm going to kind of summarize it as what I think is the ultimate thing that will separate a good photo from a bad photo. But what are the different ingredients? Well, let's start off by talking about technicality. How important is technicality to a photo? Being technically correct. That means using the correct aperture, the correct shutter speed, the correct ISO. Well, that is a very subjective question because on paper, yes, being technically correct is very important, right? It'll help with sharpness, it'll help with the correct amount of depth of field. You might make a creative decision when it comes to the aperture for how much you want in focus in the photo. You might make a creative decision with the shutter speed for how kind of blurry or sharp and kind of frozen in time you want a moving subject to be. And that is very important for different kinds of things. You can't do a long exposure photo without specifically using a longer shutter speed, right? You can't have a nice blurred out background behind your subject on a nice portrait with an 85mm without generally going for a nice wide open fast aperture f1.8, f1.4, something like that. And those are beautiful ways to take photos, but it doesn't necessarily make for a better photo than using a different technique. For example, I have taken many a landscape photo where technically it's all completely correct. It's all accurate. It's all dialed in exactly the way on paper that it should be. But the photo is just pretty average. It's just pretty nothing. It's pretty bland. And that's because the technicality by itself does not make for a good photo. It can be an important ingredient. It can be an important part of getting the end result you want to go for, but it doesn't by itself make that happen. Well, okay, I know what you're thinking. Let's jump into composition then. Is that the key part that's going to make a photo good? Well, this definitely plays a massive part, right? The composition that you choose to go for with a photo is going to be a massive part of how the viewer experiences the photo. Where does the viewer's eye naturally rest? Are they pulled into the photo? How do they kind of explore the photo with their eye? What is kind of the main focal point of the image? Part of this is deciding on a subject, right? I think that's a huge part of any type of photography. Deciding on a subject, whether it's landscape, portrait, street photography, food photography, whatever it might be, allows you to then build your composition around that. And once I realized that, we've done videos on that in the past, that really helped me to take better photos, right? Because I was able to identify what is the key subject in this photo, and then I can frame everything else around that. However, I have definitely taken many photos where I've used a composition technique, so let's say the rule of thirds, to compose my photo, but it's not necessarily made it a good photo. Just because I've popped the horizon on the top or the bottom kind of third line with the rule of thirds, or I pop my subject over to the right a little bit, over to the left a little bit, so it's on that nice line, something's intersecting, it doesn't automatically make it a good photo. It helps, definitely helps. And if you're struggling to think of a composition technique, it can be really handy to rely on some old favorites, rule of thirds, maybe a little bit of leading lines, maybe a bit of symmetry. All of those are perfectly valid techniques, really useful techniques. But by themselves, again, they don't make for a good photo automatically. You can have a well-composed photo that's still a bit boring, still a bit dull, still a bit lifeless. So technicality, composition, put those two things together, and you have now got probably a well-exposed, sharp, deliberate photo that is composed nicely. But does that make that a good photo? Not necessarily. So let's get into what I think is a third ingredient in making a good photo. Now, I touched on this just a second ago, talking about composition, but having a good subject goes a long way to taking a good photo. And this comes in many, many different forms, right? So whether you are taking a photo of a person, whether you're taking a photo of a landscape, whatever it might be, number one, identifying the subject is going to go a long way to helping you take a better photo. Because like I said in the composition part, that means you can now compose the photo around it. You also can make decisions creatively about things like aperture, shutter speed, based on how you want to capture your subject. So this starts to really inform the photo, inform how you're going to capture it, and then how it's going to be viewed later on. Picking out a subject and sticking with that, building everything around it, definitely helps to build a good photo. But there are other things to think about, things like lighting. Lighting can be, and often is, one of the most important elements of any photograph, because it's going to help you with exposure, it's going to help you with sharpness, it's going to help you tell a little bit of a story, and we'll get back to that in a second. It's going to really help build out your whole photograph. So for example, some landscape shots are very dull and very boring until that one moment when the sun just happens to come out, you get that perfect ray of sunlight coming down across your subject. It's that perfect moment, snap, that's the photo, right? That has now gone from a 4 out of 10 average dull shot, and believe me, I've taken many of those, to suddenly it's gone up to 8, 9 out of 10, beautiful, stunning. That light has made all the difference. Now you combine that with getting it technically correct, well exposed, and composed nicely, and now you're starting to get onto something a little bit interesting. I mentioned just before about telling a story, and that can be a massive part of getting a good photograph. And this is easier to do once you know what your subject is going to be. Once you've picked out a subject, it can be easier to build a story around that. Now, when people first learn about telling a story with their photographs, it can seem a little bit daunting, as if you're trying to tell some long-winded or really in-depth story, but it really can be as simple as the beauty of wildlife or the beauty of the world, right? So a beautiful landscape can simply tell the story of a lovely sunset, right? It doesn't have to be something crazy. It can just be this beautiful end of the day sunset across the ocean, let's say, for example. It can be an animal that you've captured in a lovely wildlife photo interacting in some way with the world around it. It doesn't have to be something crazy, but it can be something a little bit more in depth. If you're doing street photography, for example, generally the best street photos will be something where there's a little bit of a story to what's going on. Someone dancing in the street is an interesting story. If it's in the winter and they happen to have taken their top off, well, all of a sudden, that's a little bit of a different story to just a generic street photo, right? Someone enjoying the magic of Christmas, maybe giving money to a street performer, that can be a really meaningful moment that you've captured, and now it tells a little bit of a story. It's not just technically correct, it's not just well exposed, and it's not just about the composition, it's about that moment. And I think this is one of the two main ingredients that really go into capturing a great photo. And I think those two main ingredients are, number one, intent, which is kind of everything we've been talking about up to this point, right? So the technical side of things, the composition, thinking about the light, thinking about kind of the angles, how you're going to frame things up, making creative decisions with the aperture, the shutter speed, all that side of things, all of that is important. And the more decisions you're actively making, probably the better that photo is going to turn out. And then the second ingredient, which I actually think is probably the most important part of all of photography, how to take a great photo, is capturing some kind of feeling, thinking about the feeling behind the photo, right? If you capture a beautiful sunset going down over the ocean or going down over a lovely landscape, something like that, just a lovely, wonderful landscape that you're very happy with, that feeling of beauty and awe and amazement is absolutely conveyed through that photo. That is a completely valid way to go about photography. And I am always so much happier when I capture something like that. When you do rock up to that spot to get your landscape photos and you get there and you think, this is stunning. And then you start all of your intent, right? Framing, composition, what your settings are gonna be. You can be pretty sure you're gonna come away with a great photograph. You can really nail that photograph. And that's the same with other genres as well. When I go out to take street photos, yes, I'll snap loads of different things, but for the most part, the photo that I'm happiest with is a nice mixture of intent where I've really thought about what I want to capture, then waited patiently for it to happen, but also just finding that feeling that I want to actually capture. So whether it's someone in the rain with an umbrella in the dark going through the city, or whether it is someone interacting with someone else, and it is this just beautiful little moment that only existed for a fraction of time, and then it's gone forever, but you've captured it. Or whether it is someone just dancing in the street, just, not worrying about anything in the world, just cracking on, just having the time of their lives. That all makes for a better photo. When it comes to portraiture, for example, you can take a staged, well-lit photo, and I think that's totally fine. I think that can look really, really good. But when you just capture that little smile, someone laughing, someone just candidly enjoying the moment, and it wasn't posed, it wasn't staged. Yes, it might be composed nicely, it might be all technically correct as well, but it's real, and there's a little bit of feeling that comes through with it as well. That for me is the essence of great photography. There are so many different ways to capture that, but for me, it really does come down to the two main ingredients, intent and then capturing that feeling. And I think for me, if I could only pick one of those two, it's capturing that feeling. If you're shooting a wedding, it's better to capture the moment than to fiddle around to make the settings perfect and then realize by the time you've raised the camera up, you've missed that moment. The feeling you want to capture and then convey through your photo probably is the most important thing. So I'd love to know, what are your thoughts about this? How much of that do you agree with? How much of that is just waffle? I'd love to know, what do you think makes for a good photo, a great photo? What are the key ingredients in that? What is most important to you? I'd love to know. So let me know down in the comments. That's so interesting to me. Of course, there's a bunch of links down in the description as well, so you can check out all the gear we use for these videos, for a bunch of the different photos in this video as well. Other than that though, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, because there's new stuff all the time. I will of course see you in the next video. But until then, as always, thanks for watching.